Welcome to episode 17 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I live on the Bruce Peninsula, which is in Ontario, Canada. Here, I'm a yoga teacher as well as a consultant for yoga teachers and studios. Today, we're going to hear from Julia Khafizov about chronic pain and yoga. Thanks for being here. If you are a new listener, let me share how this podcast began. As a yoga teacher, between my yoga teacher trainings, the workshops and classes that I was taking, I was feeling alone in the wilderness of yoga entrepreneurship, especially after my first 200-hour yoga teacher training. With the consulting work that I do, I was hearing the same struggle from other teachers. This is where I decided to create a place where you can feel connected as a yoga teacher between the teacher trainings, classes, and workshops. The Connected Yoga Teacher was created so that you can easily connect to knowledge, inspiration, and a community of supportive yoga teachers as we hear about a variety of topics from yoga teachers and other professionals. Topics like how to increase your income, how to assist your students, marketing your yoga classes, workshops, and retreats, and today, how yoga can make a difference to those dealing with chronic pain. The Connected Yoga Teacher has many resources for you, the yoga entrepreneur. We have a website, a podcast, a live show, and a community of other yoga teachers from around the world in a private Facebook group. If you are a yoga teacher or you're currently becoming a yoga teacher, you can sign up for this free group. Visit theconnectedyogateacher.com and click on the Join Our Online Group. You'll see a big button on our front page. Our goal here is to support you as a yoga teacher so that you have the time, energy, and inspiration to share the yoga that lights you up. Today's guest is Julia, who specializes in pain care yoga. She lives and teaches in Grand Prairie, Alberta. Julia was living with insomnia, digestive issues, anxiety, pain, and she learned how to use yoga to increase her mobility and decrease pain. In Julia's own words, she says, "It has been over 15 years since I decided that my health is my responsibility and only my responsibility. I finally understood that in order to heal, I had to become my own health expert, that there was no specialist, doctor, therapist, or healer that could ever be as interested or as informed about my body's inner workings as me." So Julia has also taken a lot of teacher training, including meditation and a specific yoga for pain care training with Pearson, which you're going to hear her talk about. All of the links for the things that Julia brings in are in our show notes. Just go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for episode 17 there. Julia runs a yoga business called Satori Yoga. Satori is a Japanese Buddhist term for awakening, comprehension, or understanding, and I think this is so descriptive of what Julia offers. You'll get to hear Julia's wisdom and her understanding on pain care yoga. It shed a lot of light just in my own mind about pain, and it gave me some more things to think about. Julia has also been really generous to share an ebook that you can download and print, and it's an amazing summary expanding on the topic of pain care yoga and just pain in general. It includes some resources. You guys are going to love this. Thank you so much for that, Julia. The link is in our show notes, and if you're wanting to search for it right now, you can go to satoriyoga.ca/theconnectedyogateacher. She's got it all ready there for you. But again, it's in the show notes. So let's dive into the interview. Welcome, Julia. We're so grateful to have you on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast today. Julia is a member of the Connected Yoga Teacher private Facebook group that we have, and we've had a few chats, and I really am excited today to talk to you about kind of your specialty. Let's start with, when did you start doing yoga?
Oh, it would have been about 15 years ago. So, of course, the problem brought me to yoga. I had pretty severe back pain. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't want to live with it. So I looked around, and many pointers pointed in the direction of yoga. So that's where I went.
you specialize now in pain care yoga, and tell us what brought you to that. So did you start there, or did you take a 200-hour first?
Yeah, I started with 200 hours. I actually did 2 different 200 hours trainings. I don't know why I did that, but that's what happened. My first training was a Ashtanga training, actually. And what happened in that very first training is that I tore one hamstring off the bone in the beginning of this training and the other one at the end of the training. And I don't think my story is very unique, but it took about 2 years working with physio to try and repair that, and it wasn't repairing well. So I was looking for avenues and options, and I was very, very, very fortunate to find a physiotherapist with a global approach, meaning that she looked at the functional patterns of my body and how I was bending forward, for example, and other ones, and kind of suggested that my functional patterns were, not very functional. I would describe them as sucky. And so that had gotten me interested in structural yoga therapy. And so that's where I started moving my attention to for quite a few years. At some point, however, I realized that even though my structure, my posture, my alignment were getting better, I still had some pain and other nervy stuff. So perhaps as we talk about chronic pain, I can explain a little bit more. But by nervous stuff, I mean that I still had insomnia. I still had bouts of anxiety. I still had digestive issues, all related to how my nervous system, let's say, digested the world.
And was that because of the pain that you were in then?
It was all a mishmash of everything that was happening, right? So I don't know which one was the chicken and which one was the egg, but there was this mishmash of things that was happening, and I couldn't seem to clear it with just the structural therapy. So yes, I was moving forward in terms of my function, yet I had still trouble dealing with a lot of nervous system sensitivity. And pain care sounded like I can take care of my pain. So of course, I jumped at the opportunity. And when I went to that training, I had this, I know it all attitude because, I live with this pain. So clearly I know everything about pain, and this will be just a review. So I know how to work with people who live with pain. I think my understanding at the time was this is going to be all structural, more structural yoga therapy training. And I was quite excited about it. What it turned out to be is nervous system training. So it really opened my eyes on how unaware I was about the role that nervous system has to play in pain production. And of course, the nervous things like insomnia, gut disorders, and all of that. Just even though, and I had meditation training, I actually have about 700 hours of meditation training, but somehow even having that training really didn't click the link for me between pain and nervous system sensitivity, let's put it this way. So that was a really big discovery, and it took me a fairly long time actually to process the information. It was tough because it took all of my beliefs about pain and turned them right upside down. And so that was a really big challenge for me to go, what do you mean? This can't be true. From, I see where you're going with this.
Oh, I like that you took this training and then it turned things around in your mind, that you went in and you had this idea, like, I know all about pain, which you definitely did. You were experiencing it. What training was it that you took?
It was training with Pearson, and I believe he travels across Canada, maybe even in the States now. And he's a physiotherapist as well as a yoga therapist with an interest in chronic pain. So he has worked in several pain clinics, I believe, in Vancouver, helping people manage persistent pain, and at some point recognized that even though there is this new emergent paradigm in the pain care, and most integrative clinic now pain care clinics offer that. There is a neuroscience education that is offered to people who live with persistent pain. So just that education, and the statistics are staggering, just 30 minutes of neuroscience education will reduce pain amounts even in people with persistent pain, which is amazing.
Wow.
It is amazing. I can't quite pull it off the top of my head where the information is coming from, but there are studies done with functional MRI. So what they did, they measured the pain in people with persistent pain through functional MRI. So they looked at how their brain lights up in response to certain stimuli. They pulled them out of that functional MRI, gave them 30 minutes of education, put them back into that MRI. And there was a reduction in the brain activation, meaning that their pain was reduced. 30 minutes of education. So where Neil is coming from, though, because he's both a physiotherapist and also a yoga therapist, so his idea is that even though we give people, or physios quite often, give people this education, nobody offers movement that is gentle enough that doesn't trigger the nervous system. And we can talk a little bit more about it in
tell
detail.
me about that. So that must be what you then really connect with when you do pain care yoga.
So Neil had this whole concept that unless we combine the education, so like intellectual education of giving people this information with an actual ability to move in a safe environment where they connect with like-minded people and are also taught how these principles of neuroscience then apply to pain care or movement, that's where changes begin to happen. And so this is what I do. I attempt to, and again, like I said to you, I'm not by any means call myself pain specialist, but I attempt to give my students a chance to feel that movement can be safe.
Okay.
Because when you are in pain, nothing feels safe. Moving certainly doesn't feel safe. And so this is a chance for them to feel that movement can be safe, that breathing can be safe, and then also get some sort of education. So what I do is a combination, a hybrid delivery, where the movement class is augmented by weekly email where I talk about these pain care principles so that they get both the, some of the neuroscience information as well as the movement, and they can use both to then apply that to whatever else they do in their life.
This is fantastic. I love how you said that you show them movements that aren't painful, because this is one thing that I see, when I work one-on-one with people, they'll come in with chronic pain and then we do some gentle movement and they're shocked, like, oh, that didn't hurt. And they're just lit up. It's one of the best things that I feel like I can offer.
I know. And in the terms of neurochemistry, the different neurotransmitters that we secrete, right? This is a whole different scene, right? So when they move and they're in pain, there's a certain amount of certain neurochemicals that are produced. When you move and you're not in pain, whole different scenario. So that in itself, just that experience will already reduce pain simply because there is different neurochemicals that are being secreted because they experience no pain when they move. This is wonderful.
Okay, so this is really key for anyone who's not a yoga teacher, because I think a lot of yoga teachers get the message that that whole myth of no pain, no gain doesn't apply, doesn't work in the body. But for yoga students then, that's a big message to them as well, that if something is hurting, if something is painful, that's a great message for the body to move out of it, to be doing something different.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes and no. And on that remark, I will say too, if you want to look at Matthew Ramski, and he's doing an investigation, I'm sure you're familiar with that, but there is a theme of suffering in yoga practice, and I think many yoga teachers really subscribe to that theme and the vision of pranic healing that doesn't necessarily apply to healing per se, like to a healing model that we can understand. So Matthew Ramski has a really interesting way of looking at how we teach, how we word, and where the modern culture of yoga comes from. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff there to look at if you want to explore that.
I'll put a link to that in our show notes, as well as Pearson.
Yeah, so Matthew he's writing a book which is called What Are We Actually Doing in Asana? And so that is something interesting to take a look at. He's done a few trainings. So he actually takes this on the road and he does presentations at the yoga studios where he looked at, from what I've seen, he looks at how we instruct in terms of cueing. So there is often an invitation in a yoga class to explore the depth of the yoga pose and melt into your sensations, which are not necessarily a good idea to go, and especially if you're working with a demographic that has persistent pain.
So now, just in terms say that again. So if you're working with a demographic that has chronic pain, say that again. Then it's this work by Matthew. What was his last name again?
Matthew doesn't look at a chronic pain demographic. He looks more at a broad spectrum of yoga and in general, and how we instruct. And if you look around at a lot of yoga videos and yoga instruction alike, quite often there is an invitation to move deeper into the pose or explore the pose deeper, and that kind of language. And that kind of language can be really challenging for students, even experienced students, because for a lot of people that will be an invitation to move toward the edge of pain or move beyond the edge of pain because, well, I must be stretching. And I hear that from even the students who have chronic pain. Well, it hurts, so therefore it means I must be opening. We don't know this. I don't know if this is true.
Okay, that's good. I love I don't know answers. So say for the teachers out there who have someone, I'll just give like the most common example is you're teaching a group class. Someone comes up to you at the beginning of the class and says, they fill out their waiver form and they also tell you, I have chronic back. So how does a teacher move through and look after that student in a group class?
Oh, it's a challenging scenario. I think you want to start with assessing the situation in terms of how bad this pain is. So I generally don't teach flow classes. So I don't get the demographic that general yoga studios get because I specialize in pain and therapy. This is what I get, right? So I don't generally have to deal with that situation. But assuming that you are a general yoga studio that are offering classes across the board, I would assume that your demographic, even if they have pain, it's either just something that happened recently or it's not severe enough. So you want to look at kind of questions like, well, where it is on a scale from 1 to 10, how long have you had it? Have you lost sleep over it? Are you working with any other therapist or care provider? And if any of the questions begin to red flag you, so if they had it for over 6 weeks, if it isn't getting better but getting worse, if they don't know what it is and they feel threatened by it, these are all your red flags that you might be needing to refer that person somewhere else because you're putting yourself at a liability. Something happens, might not be what you did, might be just the reaction of the nervous system that went into a freak out because the movement didn't feel safe. If that person hasn't been trained how to access movement safely and how to receive instruction in a safe way, you don't know what's going to happen. So if you're getting the red flag that this person is needing more therapeutic approach, I would suggest don't try to flirt around with things.
Right. That's such a good point for yoga teachers to know that it's okay to say, you know what, this class really isn't for you. To know that line and to really respect that in the student and to be taking care of them in that way, to say, this is a advanced flow class. We're going to do some handstands.
Sorry, I'll just interject here. I understand that for most of us, it's an economical issue too, right? I mean, it's not exactly a hedge fund investment, this yoga business. So for many of us, it's an economical situation, right, where you turn a person away. And so where I look at it in this perspective is this is my reputation online here. I invite that person into the class that is not appropriate for him or her, and suddenly the hurt person bad news spread, right? And I've heard bad news about good teachers in my town. Doesn't mean they're bad teachers, but these news spreads. So when you think about, well, can I afford to turn this one person away? You also need to think about, can I afford to have my reputation tarnished by not something that I did, but just because bad news tend to spread. And that's where you need to place your attention, I think.
I know that you run a group class, pain care class, and then also do one-on-one work with people. What do you do more of, private sessions or group?
I do more private sessions. So I teach 5 group classes a week, 2 of them pain care. One of them is corrective movement. I also teach 1 beginner class, and I teach a yin class. And then the rest of it is, so about 10 classes, 10, 11 classes a week I teach privately.
If you were giving, I know that we've already chatted earlier on before our interview time, how individualized that one-on-one time is with people. But for yoga teachers or students dealing with chronic pain, what are some of the things that you start to look for, and what are some of the things that can really help them?
So where I usually start, and again, it depends where a person is, but a really good place to start for yoga teachers is understanding what to look for when working with a person who has persistent pain. And so understanding that pain is nervous system production. So I just taught a teachers convention. So about 50 teachers in the class, and I teach pain care yoga class to that audience. And so I only have an hour and a bit to deliver and make them interested. Why do you need to come to pain care yoga, right? So here is my spiel, and I think that might make sense to everyone. I feel like I sold that one very well, so I'll just use it here as well. So let's say we have an experience of pain, right? And we're going in for surgery. And so when we're put under full anesthetic, not only the experience of pain disappears, but also muscle tension disappears. Joint restriction disappears unless there is certain structures in the joint, right? So your surgical team will actually have to support your body in a way that you don't dislocate, because you become so lax. Why does that happen? Because you just shut down your nervous system. As soon as you wake up, the usual tension, wherever we feel muscle tension, limitation in the range of motion, that starts to come back. So you can go in with a frozen shoulder that doesn't move in real life, go under full anesthetic, and all of a sudden that shoulder becomes mobile. What does that tell us? Nervous system has something to do not only with pain production, but also with production of tension on the body. And so the way that we're moved is modulated by the state of our nervous system. So when you begin to work with people who live with persistent pain, understand that their nervous system is really super sensitive, meaning that yes, they will get triggered by the movement, and not all of them are. So general sensitization appears in some percentage of chronic pain sufferers, not everyone, but appears quite often across the board. And so where you want to go is nervous system and stress. And so use the techniques of breathing, of mindfulness, of meditation that you can find, that you have already in your toolbox, to downregulate the nervous system. The more that you can learn to downregulate the nervous system, the better the situation to start with. And you cannot really start approach and structural work if your nervous system is buzzing. So because whatever you do structurally will not land on a fertile soil of nervous system that is able to accept what you're offering. So you always want to start working with people who live with persistent pain by these same questions. Are you sleeping? How is your digestion? How is your elimination? Do you feel like you're becoming more and more sensitive to heat or cold? Are clothing tags bother you? Right. How about this pressure? Like all the little things that relate to nervous system dysfunction. There is a really good test that I get my people to do. It's on Are You a Highly Sensitive Person test.
Okay. Is that online or you have it?
Yeah, it is online. It's I can't remember the name of the author, but she wrote a book on being a highly sensitive person.
That's okay.
And so, yeah. So what happens? Oh, I actually have it open because I was just sending an email to a person.
Yeah, well, we can do it after, and if you want to send that to me, that'd be great. We can put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So People who have sensitive nervous system are predisposed to experience of persistent pain. Persistent pain sensitizes the nervous system, so you will have more sensitive nervous system. It's a loop. So the more that you're able to downregulate yourself, and it really is individual. If your person who you're working with is really in the throes of chronic pain, it's a constructive rest position and often modified. So you might be supporting them with all sorts of things and then guiding them through some really sometimes simple, and sometimes you need to go more complex breathing practices, simply because the more you are able to offer them an escape from pain, the more their nervous system will be able to calm down. So things like alternate nostril breathing, think, how can I confuse their mind? This is where you want to go. How can I confuse them? So I often we do alternate nostril breathing without blocking the nostril. We turn our hands one way and the other way. So there is enough neuro input that their brain just can't pay attention to pain. And that might be the start of where you begin to work with them. At the same time, still looking to downregulate the nervous system. So things like pranayama, you only need 4 minutes actually before the nervous system begins to downregulate. Things like rhythmical movement, even if it's just the fingers, because it'll increase your production of serotonin. Jill Miller uses, and Kelly Starrett actually, they both use core ball underneath the abdomen to downregulate the nervous system. Some people can handle it. That's a great tool to have. So figure out the eye bag. Bo Forbes uses the eye bag over the eyes to again downregulate. So think, what can I do to help this person downregulate their nervous system to the degree that we can then begin working structurally?
Okay, these are great. So the breath, anything that's like slow, gentle, rocking kind of, or repetitive movement.
Slow, gentle, rocking, repetitive. But again, it needs to be complex enough, because pain, and chronic pain especially, is attention greedy. So what it does, it rewires the brain to pay more and more attention to the area of discomfort. What you want to do is create a distraction, divert your attention somewhere else. So like I said, anything that is complex enough so that it diverts their attention to something else, like Sata Nama breathing, right? Where the hands are occupied and the sounds of the breath all have to be coordinated. So look for kriyas that are complex in their movement, and especially something to do with the hands, because hands have huge brain mapping, so it would be easier for the brain to divert attention to, say, hands.
Right. Oh, I can really relate to this, because I remember thinking, because the first 200-hour training I ever took was Kundalini, and I thought, I'll just take that 11-minute meditation time and I'm going to think over my grocery list. But no, I couldn't do it because it kept me so busy.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
What if someone comes in and they can't get down on the floor? Because I know you said constructive rest. What if they're in a chair?
You can do this in the chair. You can do this in a wheelchair. I mean, and look at Matthew Sanford. He, some of his work is on a chair, but he's in a wheelchair. So some of his work is in the wheelchair, some of his work is out of the wheelchair. It doesn't matter really where you are. So if you're limited to the chair, that's what you use. That matters very little.
That's great.
It's nice. It's nice to get nervous system into a little bit more. Like if you think about nervous system in those two terms, there is central nervous system, right? So we have the brain, the spinal cord. There's also peripheral nervous system. So everything that comes down into the arms and the hands, that's periphery. So the more that you can support the periphery and give slack onto the central nervous system in terms of structure, that then can ease off the tension, the nervine tension along the lines.
So what would you suggest if teachers want to look more into pain care yoga? They can take a specialized teacher training. How long was your teacher training for that?
It was, let's see here, it was 2 increments. So I think 4 days and 5 days so 2 increments. And then to get my 80 hours, I had to have a client and I had to write a course project on that. Yeah, so that's what I did. And then I think Neil is starting to offer a more advanced training starting this fall, I believe. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then in terms of other resources, say if teachers are limited from travel or whatever, and they can't get away to a yoga teacher training, do you have a favorite book or a blog?
Both Forbes looks a lot at downregulation as well and enteric nervous systems. I can see that she's starting to look into the nature of chronic pain as well, because again, it all relates to the state of the nervous system. And she has some online trainings there. I found they're quite pricey, but there is something that could be read. As far as books, let me think here. Painful Yarns by Lorimer Mosley, and that is a really quick introduction to chronic pain, not per se pain care yoga. I don't think there's a book on that, but introduction to understanding what chronic pain is. And actually, if you look on TED under Why Things Hurt, that is a really, really awesome introduction of how pain is created in the body.
Okay. Something else I was going to ask you. If you are teaching a group class and it's pain care yoga and you know everyone coming in has some sort of pain, do you have a general message that you kind of give them as an introduction to that class that you could share?
Yes. So we talk about several things. We talk about the breathing as a thread through the whole entire class. And so one thing that we do, so what happens with especially persistent pain, again, well, the breathing changes. And the way that it changes is quite often like this. Your inhale maybe will stay the same. It'll probably shorten, but stay the same. You hold your exhale. Whenever there's experience of pain, we hold our breath. We don't exhale. The other thing that happens is the breathing becomes quite irregular. So it's like peaks and valleys. And so the first step that we do, we smooth out and even out and lengthen out the breathing. And that stays as a thread across the whole class. And we come there often because as they begin to move, quite often they'll lose that. They lose the ability to breathe smoothly. So it's either I move or I breathe, but not both. And so that is an additional challenge that people with persistent pain, again, have, is that they cannot really well or at all connect the smooth, well breathing with a good movement. There is the body breath disconnect. And so one of the pieces that we do is let's smooth out, even out the breath, and then keep it as we move. So we often come back. And then in terms of organizing the class, what I'll say is this. We need to check in with ourselves. So anything that we do, even if you're just lying on your back and taking your knees side to side, how far does it feel safe to go? Does this feel safe? And it's not about this hurts. So this is I think our big confusion. Does this feel safe? Because the line or the amount of movement before you run into nervous system protection or protection by pain might be a little bit more than what it is you think it is. So does this feel safe is a better way to experience movement. Will I have to pay for this tomorrow? And this is a really good question. People laugh at me, but if they pause and go, will I have to pay for this tomorrow if I keep on doing this? They can usually really say, yeah, I'm going to pay for this tomorrow. And that's where they need to stop, because that's the baseline of their nervous system, whatever it is able to accept as safe right now. So understanding these two principles can already create framework for a pain care class in terms of, can we move in the safe range of motion? It's not necessarily pain-free range of motion, because we still want to challenge the edges of our pain. If we don't, our range of motion will continue to shrink. We still need to challenge the edges of our motion and the edges of our pain, but in a safe manner. So does this feel safe? And will we have to pay for this tomorrow? Are the good guiding principles?
That's a great discernment. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Do you have kind of a signal in your class? Do you tell them, if you're experiencing pain, do this, like tell me?
Generally not, because everyone in that class has chronic pain. So I generally don't, but I go, so before they attend the class, they will usually get some paperwork from me, not paperwork, sorry, they don't have to fill it out, but some information from me regarding the nature of the class, the nature of pain, and where our work starts from. And then in every class, they will be reminded that you only move just as far as you feel safe. And so I will probably repeat these words 20, 30 times in the hour and a half class? Does this feel safe? Because it's because there is such a tendency to push. And for people who live with chronic pain, there is a disconnect, body-mind disconnect. They disembody because they don't want to be in the body.
That's great. Does this feel safe? And am I going to have to pay for this tomorrow? That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're inviting someone who has some pain into your general class, these are really good principles for them to follow. And maybe perhaps for anybody who go into the class, right? If you're starting yoga, how do you know? Like we go, oh, I should have known better, but we weren't taught better. So if you are going into a yoga class, this might be a really good question to ask yourself. Pain care taught me to go in general classes and ask these questions because my body wasn't moving in the way that I was expecting yet. I had enough. I could disassociate from my body really easily, and I could push myself into all sorts of contortions and have no experience of anything that is happening in my body. So for me, coming back to, does this feel safe? And even if I have disassociated and I don't feel the body, I can very well answer the question, no, this feels not safe. Right. And I will definitely be sore tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, this also reminds me of in episode 3, we heard from Margaret Howard, who said that she felt unsafe going into a pose, and it wasn't physical safety, it was an emotional safety. So I like this. Does this feel safe? Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, for many people, if you recall that pain is nervous system production, when going back to the beginning of this conversation, emotional stuff, anxiety, all trauma, that's what I live with. This is what I deal with. They all come back to the nervous system setting. So working through pain care yoga and mindfulness made me recognize that some early childhood experiences of trauma in my life had created a setting for me to be predisposed to chronic pain. How I choose to deal with it now is a whole different story. But even given that understanding, I feel is a gift because the more that I can understand it, the more I can treat myself with kindness rather than disassociate and push forward no matter what, which is I am, taught to do. And I think many women are.
What is your personal go-to if you think, okay, nervous system feels like it's really on overdrive here,
fuzzy,
and or there's pain? What's your personal go-to?
I would put a 20-pound sandbag on my diaphragm, lie on my back and breathe.
Okay, I love that. I think I might do that later on today.
Yeah, it feels delightful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of this today. Is there anything else that you feel like, you know what, if yoga teachers knew this piece about pain in their own practice, in their own bodies, or for their students, that it would just make life a little easier for everyone? Is there anything else that you can think of?
Yes. I want to say this. Pain is our friend, not in the way that we're taught to no pain, no gain. But pain is a great friend because our body has only very limited ways of communicating with us, with the conscious mind, and pain is one of them. So heeding that communication is imperative to our health, and recognizing the signals is important. And basically, pain care yoga that's what it is all about, is recognizing that there is a need of the body to communicate. And yes, it communicates like right now, like a cranky toddler. But what do you do with a cranky toddler? You soothe it. You soothe him or her. You nurture him or her. You wrap them on the blanket and give them nurturing foods. And if you begin to treat your sensitive nervous system in this way, you will be moving so much faster forward rather than pushing it.
That's great. That's good to know that, we always put a negative spin on pain. And also what you said earlier about someone under anesthetic and the nervous system, we need that as well. It's not like we want the nervous system to be so relaxed that we can't move our bodies. So they're both needed.
Yeah, there's got to be a balance. There's got to be a balance. So when it comes handy is understanding, here is my baseline of how I can function, right? So if I feel like I have deep rest or I've calmed myself down, and you begin to see the spikes of stimulation, spikes of overstimulation. So what I wrote in our Facebook group yesterday is that I feel that there is the spikes of stimulation when I go on the computer, and now I'm learning to discern when there is overstimulation. And so that's a way for me to check in and go, am I going to have to pay for this? Not tomorrow, but when I go to bed tonight. If I let myself spike out of control, the moment that my head hits the pillow, I'm going to be wide-eyed.
Do you have any suggestions for people, and I might be talking about myself here, who spend a lot of time on the computer to come into a place of restful sleep? Is there anything that you can suggest?
I don't know. This is something that I'm just learning. So for me, it was this long process of understanding where is my baseline. And I just wrote a blog post to commemorate the time change.
Soon you might not have to deal with that in Alberta.
I know. I don't want to get excited though, right? But I wrote a blog post for my subscribers, and what I wrote about is I grew up in the culture of productivity. If you're feeling bad, you go work. And one of the phrases that I took to heart was work till your nose bleeds. And I have done that. And so what I've really trained myself to do is disassociate. Again, going back to trauma, going back to nervous system, this will all make a really good connection. But I'm going to tell you this is lovely. I had a kidney stone passing one of the days that I was to teach yoga 2 or 3 years ago. I went and I taught the class. I didn't feel pain. This is how good am I at disassociating. I didn't feel nothing from the neck down. So I could shut down whatever it is going on with me and operate here, except for when, it doesn't work anymore. And so my journey through pain care practice has been learning that I have no idea how to downregulate. I have no idea what my nervous system, never mind my nervous system, my body is doing at any point in time. And so then the digestive disorders, the anxiety, the insomnia, the pain are all flourishing. And so what it took for me is recognizing that I can downregulate and be beginning to see where these spike from the baseline of calm nervous system, where they begin to up. And so now that's what I watch for in a day. And if I have a really busy day, I'll probably go screen free because I know otherwise there is going to be no sleep for me.
Right.
So I can't change my nervous system to be different, but I can manage things holistically. And holistically, I mean, not only in terms of my activity, but I will change my diet because if I know that something is going on. So like whenever there is a busy day and I feel wound up, I'll cut out sugar completely. And not that my diet is full of sugar, but I'll cut it out because I know that that'll help me sleep better that night. So it's just beginning to look at everything in such a more holistic lens. I think that's lovely. I don't know how else to do it. This is my personal experience. So this is what I'm doing.
Well, and your personal experience is a real gift to your students because you can offer that. And even now sharing that with us teachers, we're all people struggling with our own things. And screen time is something that I think is, as a society, has become a big struggle. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And also just sharing how you're still learning. It's not like you think, well, I have all of the answers now. I love that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for setting this up. This is lovely. It's been lovely.
So there you have it, connected yoga teachers. In summary of that, I really took away what Julia said about the red flags, the questions to ask our students. So we ask them things like, how does the pain feel on a scale of 1 to 10? How long have you been experiencing the pain? Are you losing sleep over it? Are you working with a healthcare provider? And I really appreciate where Julia says that there are times when we need to refer our students to someone else, someone who can give a more therapeutic approach, or where we need to ask students to not come to a class. If it doesn't suit them, it isn't offering what's best for them. And these red flags are if they've had pain for over 6 weeks, if the pain is not getting better, but instead getting worse, if they don't know what the pain is or they're feeling threatened by it. So I think these are great indicators. Thanks for pointing those out to us, Julia. Julia also talked to us today about the loop of chronic pain, and I see this working with people with chronic pain and how this relates to the importance of moving people into a relaxation response where we're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. So when people are experiencing pain, chronic pain, the sympathetic nervous system is triggered, that fight or flight, and then it increases sensitivity to pain. And this is biological, this is the way we're made so that we survive. It's just that this loop of pain keeps going. Julia talked about a video, and I'm going to put the link for the TED Talk, Why Things Hurt, and that might help to just talk about that in a little more detail. Also, to recap, Julia gave us some things that she starts with students in chronic pain. And again, always looking at, it's not the symptoms that we're giving yoga to or treating in any way, it is the individual. So Julia talked about that before we even started the interview, how passionate she is about really looking at the individual. And so I already knew that about her, so I was pushing her to say, what are some of the tools that you use? So again, constructive rest pose, she said, was very useful. Distracting the brain, so using a complex breath practice and or movement like the Satanama Kriya. And I found a link to this meditation. I'm excited to share it with you guys because it's by Tracy Eccleston, who we already heard from in a previous episode on money mindset. So I'll put that link. Thanks for that, Tracy. It also talks about how we can use the same meditation when dealing with students or the brain in terms of Alzheimer's. So I was fascinated by that. Another tool is rhythmical movement. And then the last two were pressure on the abdomen. So this might be a ball in the prone position, or as Julia talked about, a sandbag on the abdomen lying on the back. And lastly, eye pillows, which lots of people love those eye pillows, and there's a reason for that. Again, I'm going to link to all of the resources that Julia shared with us. She talked about the work that Bo Forbes does. She talked about a book called Painful Yarns. And I just want to reiterate one more thing that Julia said. She asked us to reframe our wording to students. Instead of talking about pain, especially when we're working with students with chronic pain, start to ask them, or even ask yourself, does this feel safe? And I love how this looks after the physical and emotional safety of students. This really goes along with the message that Margaret Howard shared with us in episode 3. I'll put a link to that as well. And lastly, I want to leave you with a quote that Julia used in our episode today. Pain is our friend. Heeding that communication is imperative to our health. Thank you, Julia, for your time today. Thanks also for bringing up your own thoughts on screen time, overworking the body and mind, and how this is also connected to the nervous system. I like how you brought in our emotional health to this as well. So let us know, was there something that really resonated with you from today's episode with Julia? She's in our private Facebook group, The Connected Yoga Teacher, and you can ask questions in there. I'm going to post a video in there around the time that this episode gets released, and we would love to hear from you. Have a wonderful week, Connected Yoga Teachers. Share the yoga that lights you up.